good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which side of the globe you're joining us from. Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Dana Wall, and I am a social psychologist and director for customer success at JoVE. Thank you for joining us today for our first session of our Innovation in Instruction webinar series, in which you'll hear from the 2021 JoVE Science Education and Research Innovation Award winners as they discuss their innovative solutions to advancing scientific research and education. In this first session, actively engaging digitally native students with social media, 2021 JoVE Innovation in Instruction Award winner, Dr. Glenn Hurst, will share how he utilized social media platforms such as Snapchat and TikTok to engage with students by creating 1-minute videos, allowing him to demonstrate key techniques that students use in the laboratory, as well as contextualized courses for the use of image and video. Before we proceed, I'd like to get a few housekeeping items out of the way. Can everyone please use the raise hand icon on their toolbox to let me know that you can hear me? If you'd like to ask our speaker any questions, please submit them in the Q&A section of your toolbox, and we will answer as many questions as we have time for during a Q&A portion at the end of our session. You'll get a recording of this webinar in your email in the next 24 hours. And lastly, at the conclusion of the session, there'll be a brief 5-question survey. We would appreciate you providing your feedback so we can continue to improve our webinars. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my co-panelist, Dr. Glenn Hurst, Associate Professor of Chemistry Education at the University of York in the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us, Glenn.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation to be able to speak with you all today and your very lovely introduction. Many thanks. Let me just attempt to share my screen. Is it possible to confirm if you can see the full screen there, please, Dana?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Shall I begin?
Please do.
Brilliant. So fantastic to see you all. Yes, my name is Glenn. I'm from the Green Chemistry Centre of Excellence in the Department of Chemistry in York in the United Kingdom. And as mentioned, today I'm going to be focusing on how I specifically use technology-enhanced learning with specific emphasis on social media with students at the University of York and beyond. And so just broadly to actually begin with, what motivated me to initially explore utilizing social media within education was the propensity of students that A, have mobile phone devices, and B, actively engage with social media as part of their everyday lives, but also as part of their education as well. And based on that, I wanted to learn, well, what is it that's particularly special about social media that may help me to leverage its use in order to help students learn chemistry? Is it about the actual way that you can use social media to engage students? Is it about how we may help students to contextualize course content by using social media as a vehicle that way? Is it utilizing social media to perhaps help to develop students' own personal skills, specifically communication skills? So those sorts of questions were things that I was bearing in mind when embarking on these projects. And the place where I initially started was to learn in my local environment, in my wider department, about how social media was used at that level. And indeed, at the department level, we use Twitter, Instagram, YouTube in order to showcase our undergraduate lab from an admissions perspective, but also to showcase various practical techniques and how instrumentation works. You can see our undergraduate lab behind me in my profile picture there. And also Instagram to actually share with our students important news updates, actually in terms of what our community members in our department are actually doing. So that was at the department level in terms of how we were using social media. But what about in education? Well, some of the inspiration that I took were initially from colleagues. One example in the first bullet point there was simply creating a hashtag via Twitter associated with the lecture course, where the instructor may pose, for example, a question at the end of a certain lecture, linked to a certain hashtag, and as part of a competition, students had to submit their answers via Twitter, and the instructor was able to provide feedback and select a winner. Another example of what one of my colleagues did, Professor David Smith, was initially utilize YouTube in order to create and share content for students. So you can see some very short screencasts that Dave has actually done there to teach organic chemistry. And certainly we've all become accustomed to that over the past year and a half. But actually moving forwards and empowering the students was the next step of his work, and actually using YouTube as a platform for students within our undergraduate cohort to create their own videos, and in doing so enhance their own communication skills about various aspects of chemistry, and that we assessed these as part of their degree program. So you can see a student here that happens to be having a flying lesson and talking about the polymers associated with say creating aircrafts. And in doing so, the students actually become global educators within their own right. And through this, we're able to facilitate online discussion through the comments feature in YouTube. And another example of previous innovation from colleagues within my department was within the realm of MOOCs, or massive open online courses. One of my colleagues, Andy Parsons, uses Twitter extensively as part of this, in two ways, really. One is to actually disseminate one tweet per day, 365 days of the actual year, to communicate chemistry in hopefully a relatable way. So you can see an example taken on February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, where Andy was talking about dopamine that is actually released when we do things that make us feel good and that we are happy about. So that's one way in which Andy used Twitter. Another way is, again, empowering the actual students, in this case, to communicate results of a particular experiment with the instructor and with the actual wider cohort. And you can see one of the students doing this who happened to make a fish-themed lava lamp there. So I thought it was important just initially to articulate the impetus and inspiration for me in terms of practice that was already occurring within the vicinity in which I work. And the initial step was, again, inspired specifically by Dave and his work on YouTube, was to get students, or not get, actually encourage students at the end of lectures. There was no assessment associated with this, no formative or summative assessment, but to create their own videos outlining the answer, in my case, to a particular organic reaction mechanism that I posed at the start, at the end of a lecture. And all I did was simply articulate the benefits of the students engaging with this and doing it, and how it will scaffold future assessments. There was no marks associated with this. And there was a mixture of students posting it to my Twitter account, where I was able to provide feedback via an alternate means, and also sending me short videos via email there. So that was my first foray within this field. And then I wanted to think about specifically using social media apps that students do use a lot as part of their everyday lives anyway. And to see, as opposed to being driven by the pedagogy and using an app that's specifically being created for education, use something that's already exceedingly prevalent within what the students use anyway. And the first place we actually went to was Snapchat, effectively a photo messaging app that allows users to send images and videos that disappear after a set amount of time. And so in terms of how I actually used this, I established a class account effectively. And within my undergraduate cohort, around, I think, 290 students, effectively initially outlined what I would be using the account for, which I'll talk about in a moment. And just to articulate that I wouldn't add any of the students as contacts as part of this account. So there wouldn't be a two-way relationship there. It was just an opportunity for the students to follow this class account and receive updates in really 4 key areas. One of these was to help students to contextualize content that we talked about in lectures in the real world. And hopefully this would lead to an enhanced engagement with subject matter.
Yeah.
One example you can see in this image on the bottom left there, some of the daffodils in the actual garden outside of the department there. And I talked about the yellow color linking to the carotenoids like beta carotene that we talked about in the lecture. Similarly, here's me playing golf, and I'm pleased with my pitch to pretty close from about 100 yards or so. And I'm talking about the core of golf balls contains a certain polymer that we talked about in lectures. That's just a taste really of how I happen to use it in that respect. I also used it to demonstrate key practical techniques in the laboratory that students would subsequently use in an upcoming practical session, such as say setups. Sometimes I may have not posted perfect setups, but I actually asked them to spot a mistake and I would subsequently post an update. And also actually as part of research in labs, and certainly staff in the department absolutely love this. So effectively the intention was, with the permission from members of staff in my department, I would go into their labs, interview PhD students, postdoctoral students, so that they would talk about the chemistry that was going on in their lab. You can see an example of the video in the bottom left there, the PhD student running a column. And in doing so, it's promoting their research to their audience of potential PhD or master's students in going forwards. You can see an example here. This is me in the Amazon rainforest. So I'm really interested in green chemistry. This was during a business trip where I was developing green chemistry experiments based on the local fruits within the Amazon rainforest. And so as well as giving students that glimpse into research, students actually completed some of these experiments upon my return to York there. And then finally, just to give students an insight into my professional life as an academic and as an instructor, and hopefully this gave me the opportunity to humanize me as an instructor a little bit, and also to give me an opportunity to actually talk about the benefits of actually taking breaks, of positive mental health, of employability aspects, etc., etc. And so does this work? You've talked about what you've done, Glenn. What evidence do you have? Well, you can see some initial results that we collected through Likert style questions there. Using Snapchat, a valuable addition, 4 out of 5 or so. I feel more engaged with chemistry because of Snapchat. Key aim of actually implementing this piece of social media as part of my teaching there. A useful tool to allow me to contextualize content. Again, this was a significant target. However, I believe the issue, or one of the issues that I perceive with all of this, is it's very much top-down, instructor-led use. How can we empower students though? And this brings me to a slightly more recent project where it was effectively completely up to students that were working with me as part of a particular module to use a different app called TikTok that you may also be familiar with. And the intention here was to create their own TikTok channel, which is effectively a collection of videos to promote sustainability. And this was during the COVID-19 pandemic, to promote sustainability concepts and also talk about some chemistry that can be done in the home, kitchen chemistry, for example. So let me just play this video as an example of one of the pieces of content that our students created through this chemistry collective account on TikTok there. Brilliant. So yes, in this particular example, our student was looking at valorization of waste. For example, when you eat an orange, you peel it, you usually discard the actual peel or it goes to landfill. But actually we can extract very valuable chemicals. And in this example, we were talking about limonene there and the actual use of it to dissolve rubber there. And as you can see, we did some preliminary evaluation of the actual content that our students created. And in actually working with students as partners as part of this project, and indeed, a lot of the projects that I do, I think dissemination of the outcomes is extremely important. And in this particular paper here, you can see both Claire and Katie, as the undergraduate students, have become authors on an actual publication there, and hence as well as all of the communication benefits and related chemistry benefits, there's an employability angle here too. So that was TikTok, and then I'd just like to actually wrap up with a few more examples, and hopefully amongst all of these, there's perhaps something that you can identify and hopefully that's transferable as part of your own practice. This particular example here was students at the University of York, chemists, working with Spanish chemical engineers, effectively to investigate valorization of waste through something called biorefining. And so you can actually see two posters that students, they're actually paired up, one in the UK, one in Spain, actually made in two areas. You've got valorization of cooking oil there and valorization routes of marine plastic waste, and then subsequently sharing them with our community via Twitter in this example there. So that's an ongoing project. We happen to use posters that year. We're going to switch to infographics in going forwards. And then the final piece that I'd like to talk about is a lot of what I've talked about thus far is making use of existing apps and things that are already out there, specifically focusing on social media. But we wanted to get a little bit more ambitious, and we wanted to try to be able to create our own apps, specifically for education. And our initial foray into this was really quite simplistic and not really particularly linked directly to learning. And that was to make it effectively departmental app for admissions. That compartmentalized a lot of the content on our actual website that we would give to visitors. And we employed Chris, who was a student in the computer science department as part of a summer internship, to make this simple app here that we signpost to visitors and they downloaded as part of their visit. And as you can see there, there is some feedback there that's commenting on the distinctive nature of this compared to our competitor institutions. And it was quite heartening to actually see that other departments across the university, such as biology, followed suit with the same template as part of their own individual admissions efforts. But linking it back to learning, this was just our initial foray. We then got a little bit more confident, and we wanted to make apps specifically for learning. And we started this project a year ago now, making an app called Organic Fanatic. And this was an app to assist with learning the structure and reactivity of organic compounds within chemistry. Again, we employed Jake, who is a computer science student, to actually design and develop this, with us providing the actual chemistry expertise. It's a quiz-based app, so not particularly novel from that perspective. An actual single-player mode. There's plenty of quiz-based apps. You compete against the clock. There's multiple kind of difficulty levels, and you actually get a score or a time at the end of it. So you could use this in-class competitions, and indeed we did this and actually awarded prizes. One of the new things that we did there, though, was actually the multiplayer mode, where effectively students, say at the start of a tutorial or support teaching session as an icebreaker activity, actually just used one phone and kind of passed it around like a hot potato, and there was one student was out, for example, if they give a certain number of incorrect answers, and actually until there's a winner. So that got us quite confident on making games, given the success of that. And the actual final project that I'm going to talk about now is app development, actually not by collaborating with computer scientists, but this was by a student called Matt there, who's the first author on this publication. And Matt was a chemistry student and had absolutely no coding knowledge. He just happened to like games. And as part of his, say, 9-month project, undergraduate research project with me, he wanted to create a game. And in doing so, we used a software platform called Game Salad. And through using that, as you can see, a different type of game here, Matt's created what's called an idle clicker game. And effectively, so I'm really interested in green chemistry as my actual specialty within chemistry. You start off with a very dirty feedstock, say coal, oil, a diesel truck to actually transport that to a factory with outdated processes. And you have to click back and forward so that money is actually earned. You can also earn money by engaging with the inbuilt quiz. And when you earn money, you're able to upgrade each of these 3 components to actually make each of these areas more sustainable. And that's the intention of the actual game, where the end point is where you end up with a biorefinery. And so as opposed to a linear system, a nice circular one. And in doing so, students can learn chemistry as they actually go. And indeed, we've implemented this in York and internationally, and you can see examples of the type of feedback, or at least the quantitative feedback that we were able to actually attain there. And so, in summary, what I've tried to actually show there is really a bit of a journey, I guess, of examining initially how social media was used in the department. And I think one of the biggest catalysts for me embarking on this work was role models within the department and colleagues that were already making innovative use of social media, as I articulated earlier, and then really trying to use platforms such as Snapchat and TikTok that students at York, and in the case of TikTok, it could be a useful outreach resource, for example, as well. Apps that were really used quite well anyway as part of their personal lives without intruding on them. So that was the intention there, and moving really from an instructor-led approach to one that empowers students ultimately to actually make their own apps. And indeed, none of this, particularly the later stage stuff, would be possible without working closely with students as partners. I think it's absolutely brilliant for both parties, and hopefully, we both get a lot out of it and are hopefully able to make a lasting impact on effectively their colleagues, either in the same year or below. So with that, thank you very much for your kind attention, very much appreciated, and looking forward to answering any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hurst, for that fascinating overview of how you've been using technology and multimedia to enhance the learning experience of these students. I have lots of really good questions. The first one's multi-componential, if you will. So is the textbook dead? Are we seeing more broadly this movement towards using multimedia, YouTube videos, and other ancillary sources of reinforcement instead of or as a complement to the textbook in your experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a brilliant question, and I would hope that it is in complement to, and naturally, it is exceedingly important that students become independent learners and do this through enhancing their reading and writing skills. And it is exceedingly important as a component to that they are engaging with textbooks and journal articles and such like. So I think that is exceedingly important. I think social media, in the way that I've used it, has the benefit, well, almost convenience, because it's probably on their person through their mobile phone. Naturally, I'm making an assumption that may not be fully inclusive, that students might not have a smartphone and associated apps, and that's where TikTok comes in, that you can engage with it through an actual website. But I have found, I think, the biggest gains in using social media to really enhance that contextualization and to actually show students how in the real world the chemistry that I'm communicating affects them and impacts their lives. And I think using social media in this way is probably perhaps more effective than consulting a book, for example.
Yeah.
And then I guess there's the opportunity for students to make their own content, and in doing so, to hopefully communicate chemistry and develop their communication skills. And I mean, there's probably a lot more. Well, there certainly is a lot more that can be done with the work that I've articulated so far. I mean, it would be interesting to see students perhaps recording their own experiments or snippets of some of the experiments that they may be doing in the actual lab, and perhaps commenting on each other's or actually posting responses there. It would be, I actually find the potential of something called digital twinning quite exciting. So where, for example, you may have a student doing an experiment and that's been streamed live to students elsewhere that are engaging remotely, and perhaps able to have an impact into what's going on and what parameters are being varied and such like. I feel as though I've curtailed a little bit away from the question, but I feel as though that they should certainly be in complement to one another.
So thank you for that. Relatedly, I think we've seen, over the past 2 decades, more of a pedagogical shift towards meeting students that using the mediums that they have grown up with. I always tell folks this generation of undergraduate students grew up with a tablet and a smartphone. So this is one of the primary modalities through which they learn and they consume information and learn about the world. And I think faculty members have done a good job trying to meet them, or even meet them more than halfway in helping with this. But of course, social media, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, it's a bit of a generational thing. So what do we, for faculty members that might be older or from at a different point in their career that are not social media savvy, I mean, do they need to assimilate? What happens if they don't assimilate? And do they need to become experts to meet the needs, their evolving needs of students?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, thank you. So I think perhaps maybe I was a little bit more amenable to experimenting and trying these things, as I was using many of these apps as part of my personal life anyway. So I think that's something to concede to start with. I think, the first step would be to do what effectively we're doing here and to disseminate to other instructors the benefits of using social media and what we have found and what the evidence is, so that they can make a decision as to whether it's worth their while in effectively closing that skills gap and, becoming proficient in using it. I think, and, if they do make that decision, then I think increasingly technology enhanced learning teams at institutions and colleges do provide training on how to use social media apps in the context of learning and teaching, and that would be, I guess, the kind of next obvious step. But I think it's important that there are ambassadors or people within the local kind of region or department that actually are trialing these things and that others can see their success. Having said that, I think it is important that I think if every single academic or lecturer used Snapchat as part of their courses, it wouldn't work. And I think variety is the spice of life, and in that sense, and that these sorts of innovations can be sprinkled on various parts of the undergraduate program, but perhaps if it was used ubiquitously, there wouldn't be the same engagement. So I think that's an important factor too.
Sure, thank you. Now, one of the primary goals of university is to cultivate critical thinking skills in our students. It's also true that this generation of students like to use heuristics and mental shortcuts when they're available. And undoubtedly, these videos provide that quick answer, that quick explanation. I'm sure some of us come from a period where we wanted to find the answer to something. We had to go to the library, open up a card catalog, check out a dozen books to find a simple answer. How do you balance providing these quick explanations with cultivating the critical thinking in students?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. I think the currency has almost, in terms of top down, what we want our graduates to be and what employers want. I think, as you say, over recent decades, the kind of currency's changed somewhat in that it used to be about, knowledge and, being able to procure that was obviously a lot more difficult. Whereas now, really, I would argue that, as you say, it is more about application of knowledge to kind of solve unfamiliar problems, and cultivating that is certainly very important. I think on the critical thinking specifically, I'm not sure that perhaps kind of watching updates from me on Snapchat necessarily does that, unless I guess, especially if I'm actually just demonstrating what is the correct answer. I did mention, when thinking about experimental techniques, I was asking students to spot mistakes and such like, and then I would subsequently post updates. So I think when you are kind of trying to introduce a little bit more, there are ways to introduce a little bit more criticality than just passively watching and, okay, this is the actual answer. So I think we do need to be a little bit more creative in order to foster that, but certainly it is possible. But yeah, I think it's a concern, and I think other pedagogic interventions. This is just one tool that can help us as instructors, should be used in combination with this. But it's definitely a balancing act, as you say.
Absolutely. We have some questions from our attendees. So the first is, have you seen any wider engagement with these resources from the general public?
Certainly in terms of TikTok, yes. So with the actual TikTok, the students create their own channel, and as well as showcasing it to the undergraduate cohort with their colleagues, we actually used it as an outreach resource, and our admissions team got involved from that perspective, and we were able to actually survey some of the actual public that were actually viewing the videos to try and get their opinion. So absolutely, yes. Off the back of that, the Royal Society of Chemistry got in touch, and I'm acting as a consultant with them, who have just established their own TikTok channel where they have effectively education coordinators across the UK that can access the actual channel and post actual content. So that is very much public facing and for outreach purposes. My colleague, I think I talked at the start about Dave Smith, where he got students to make their own YouTube videos, and the example that I gave with a student making polymers within the aircraft industry. I mean, the sheer amount of views and comments from those videos are absolutely astronomical. So I think that is certainly having a big impact there. With the actual Snapchat work, that was solely limited to viewing from the actual class at which I was teaching. So not so much within that realm, but certainly many possibilities. Yeah.
Now, you in your presentation, you indicated that students self-report better subject comprehension after learning from the social media. Has that been reflected in better grades?
Yeah, good question. So certainly on the TikTok work, no, not on the TikTok work, on the when we created our own apps, so the Green Tycoon or Organic Fanatic, we did a pre and post test questionnaire for the obviously for Organic Fanatic, it was based on organic chemistry. For Green Tycoon, it was based on green chemistry, and we reported learning gains within the actual papers that we published there. So that's very positive. We also got qualitative comments that the actual apps helped students to feel more reassured ahead of exams, that they were using it as a revision resource. But when thinking about, has there been an increase in say module averages on our final summative assessments as a result of this, that's not something we've investigated. I think it would be challenging to kind of pinpoint any increase or decrease. Sure.
Now,
the actual.
What about for students that refuse to use social media? There are some that they don't want to be. They don't want any profiles. They don't want to engage on those platforms. What do they do?
Brilliant question. Yep. I'm actually a reasonably private person. I don't particularly engage too much in social media outside of my job. So I certainly see where students from that perspective are coming from, and it's absolutely paramount that we are as inclusive as possible in all of these types of instruction. And certainly one thing that we learned from the Snapchat work was, as I understand it, it is limited to viewing on a smartphone. If you don't have a smartphone, you're unable to see the content, and that already makes that really rather exclusive, I think. Now, naturally, we can save the content and maybe cross-post it onto a different social media platform like Instagram, and so the students could do it that way. We didn't run into that issue with TikTok, for example, because it can be viewed online just via an actual website. In terms of the students making their own content, and so for example, the students that engaged with the TikTok project, I think, even though we asked them to establish an actual fresh account as part of that work, so they weren't using their personal account. So that offered them some reassurance. But still, I think there certainly was a reticence at the start of the project for, say, Katie and Claire, in the actual case of the work that I talked about, to almost kind of get involved and, you know, post videos of themselves that would be available for anyone to see. And initially they kind of started doing all the videos with perhaps just their voice and perhaps their hands manipulating perhaps pieces of equipment and such like. But over time they ended up growing in confidence and ended up doing kind of dance videos where they were communicating chemistry that way. But it is an issue, I think, and you know that there actually will be students that perhaps might blankly refuse to engage in that particular project. And I think in such cases we do have to be understanding and flexible, and we can't force them. We can only articulate the benefits, I think, and it's there.
Certainly. So this last question, it's kind of two questions. First is, I think a lot of people or attendees are really interested in the methods and strategies that you've implemented. Is it okay if folks reach out to you for their own inspiration and to exchange ideas?
Absolutely. Yeah, please do get in touch. I'll just put my email address in the chat.
Brilliant. And how do you feel about folks sharing your multimedia to use in their courses as well? Is that possible?
No problem. Yeah, please get in touch with me if you want further ideas, really, or even to speak to our students so you can get first-hand perspective there. Yeah.
Understood. Are there any further questions that Dr. Hurst can answer? Okay, so reminder that a recording of this session will be available via email. We have 2 additional sessions coming up. Next week, moving traditionally in-person science courses online. And the following week, improving learning outcomes in the hybrid science classroom. But I want to extend a heartfelt thanks, token of gratitude to Dr. Hurst for joining us today, sharing his experiences and leading the way for innovation for getting this generation of students involved with science and inspired by the work that they're doing. It's truly an inspiration to all of us who are trying to improve our pedagogy. So without further ado, thank you again very much for your time. Thank you all for attending, and you will be receiving a copy of this webinar within the next day or so. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Hurst. Have a wonderful rest of your day and evening. And to all of you, thank you once again for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, everyone.